Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today I have a thought-provoking speculation. A bit bizarre, but interesting nonetheless. What if the undead really existed in a medieval historical kingdom? Because you see, I reckon every single fantasy setting has had its share of undead creatures. D&D, Dragon Age, Warcraft, Final Fantasy, and the list goes on. Zombies, vampire lords, liches, skeleton warriors, the undead are omnipresent in fantasy. And for a good reason. They make for awesome enemies and incredible villains whose nefarious wills and unpredictable behaviors bring to light challenges that are both epic and dramatic for the players. But today I'd like to have a closer look at the human kingdoms where these undead appear. The people, the society, the economy don't seem to be much affected by the presence of the undead rising. People still do their daily things in the same way they would in a medieval fiefdom. Merchants travel, buy and sell. Kingdoms fight each other in wars, and yet in my opinion, the presence of such a bane in a real medieval perspective would have an enormous impact on the society, culture, religion, military, economy, having repercussions on the everyday life of the citizens of such unlucky realms, their governments, the equipment of their armies, and much more. Again, this is a thought-provoking exercise, but I think a fantasy setting of an RPG could benefit from a more realistic approach to such heinous events. What I'm asking is, what effect would the appearance of the undead have had in Europe, say from the late 12th century to the late 15th? So if you are D&D masters or just fantasy lovers and whatnot, keep watching. This is about to get macabre and fascinating. But what's really amazing about this video is that it has been sponsored, and it is brought to you by the Walking Dead Road to Survival. Talking about a well-fitting sponsor. This game was created in partnership with Robert Kirkman himself, so it is true to the original comic book material, and you will find the characters you love such as Rick, Shiva, Carl, Glenn, Negan, and the Governor, etc., all based on the comics. Keep in mind, this game maintains the visceral aesthetics and mature themes from the graphic novels. Here, you can form up 5-man teams and take them into PvE and PvP encounters. If you are into PvP encounters, it can be really fun to just destroy all your friends, and you're gonna have lots of fun all together. In the story mode, the player's life and death decisions impact the game experience with short and long-term consequences. Downloading and trying out this game for free is a great way to support my channel, and you will enable me to make more videos for you noble ones, so please consider it. It's a win-win. Only from my link in the description box. Alright, back on topic. Oftentimes, one of the most common things that we see in fantasy settings where the undead are present is the fact that they roam the land, particularly at night, and they attack any wanderer unlucky or reckless enough to cross their path. We see this in games such as Final Fantasy, where we have random encounters which can involve the living dead, but a great example of this is the game Dragon's Dogma. In this game, leaving the safety of the walled cities during the day will result in fighting goblins, bandits, RPs, and the occasional epic monster. But roaming the lands at night turns this game into a total horror nightmare, proper Capcom style. The undead infesting the outside of the lands would have massive effects on these kingdoms. Traveling, wandering, moving around the regions or from city to city will become a whole new experience. The level of danger involved in the act of traveling alone would reach a level that within the actual social and legal system of the land, things will probably change. This would also have repercussions on the landscape. The roads that lead from one settlement to another would have to be fortified, which would require a certain amount of funds for the roadworks and maintenance and for the salary of the extra sentries. This would probably mean new taxes to be created and forced on the already worn out and miserable population. Also, travelling would need to be legally regulated. You would probably need to gain permission to leave town for any journey that would last longer than daylight. Illegal couriers ready to take risks to make a profit from such a situation could become just one possible aspect of this new twisted reality. Banning someone from a town to the wild outside would acquire a whole new meaning, and please note the word wild I added there. Depending on the severity of the menace that undead pose, the outside of civilized areas might have a completely different level of degrade. This of course would vary from setting to setting, but imagining a situation where the lands are literally infested by a huge number of all sorts of abominations, anything that goes outside the actual imperial road would decay into total wasteland, poisoned, crooked, deformed. The vegetation and plants themselves might change as a result of the dark magic of greedy liches and vampire overlords, laying their sordid and immoral hands on more and more human domain. The natural becoming unnatural. The kingdoms would be on a constant state of permanent warfare, and war would gain a completely new meaning. The undead don't stipulate truces, are not interested in agreements, they don't colonize, they destroy, they annihilate. Killing enemies in battle for them means increasing their ranks. This characteristic of undead armies is never really fully appreciated because games such as Heroes of Might and Magic have to balance it up in order to make these games playable. But in a real-world scenario where magic or biology actually justified the undead being real, their ability to continually stock up their armies would be a massive and enormous advantage, which would make undead armies extremely tough to face. Strategy on the battlefields would change completely when facing undead armies. Keeping your soldiers safe would have to reach a whole new level, casualties would have to be kept to a bare minimum, and the generals involved, the discipline of the soldiers, and the coordination of the units would have to reach a level that our world has never seen before. New ranged weapons would be devised, trying to keep the enemy at bay as much as possible. Knight armor would become more and more important, reaching peaks of metallurgical craftsmanship, experimenting with new shapes, forms, and lightly armored cavalry and infantry would probably not be an option anymore, and heavy cavalry and heavy infantry would be the only kind of hand-to-hand combat units, supported by modified, heavy-ranged weaponry of all sorts. If the bulk of the undead armies were made of skeleton warriors, probably maces and warhammers would gain a whole new significance. Already in armored combat, these weapons had historically a significantly higher importance if compared to bladed weapons, because of course cutting through armor was impossible, and when fighting a fully armored opponent, a blunt weapon was a better choice. But when facing an army of skeletons, this would probably become a sole option. As skeletons don't bleed, and since destroying in pieces the whole bony structure is the only way to stop one of those, cutting through rotten bone would not be a reasonable option. Even the religious and literary significance of the mace might surpass that of the sword, and in this alternate reality, Excalibur might not be a sword at all. The economy of these lands would feel the impact of such monstrous beings. Traveling being so difficult would restrict the ability of cities to trade among themselves. Prices of items would inflate, and the black market might be filled with items we instead give for granted. If traveling by sea was still safe, this would mean an enormous investment on all sorts of ships, and navigation would receive a considerable boost. If the seas were also infested, then poverty and hardship of living would smell desperation. Another aspect that is often underestimated is the fact that an undead army is like no other army. The undead don't get tired. They don't need to sleep. Now, skeletons don't eat. Ghosts don't eat. Zombies do, but most likely they don't really need to. And vampires, although they do need to suck blood, in any fantasy setting that we have ever seen, they never really seem to have troubles finding prey. Now, in terms of logistics, of mobilization of actual armies, if we pause for a moment and consider all of this, undead armies would be tremendous. What this means is that any undead army is not slowed down by animals having to carry supplies. They are always combat ready. They can march endlessly, so they can reach any target or any region at a faster pace than any human army. And even if we consider that the whole army is limited to the speed of the slowest element, perhaps being zombies for example, still the fact that they can march all night, all day and all night again would definitely compensate for that. Another important aspect is that during the battles, the undead don't fear anything. They are immune to fear. So when we imagine actual medieval battles and we study them, we see that oftentimes people run. They run away, they regroup again. People don't want to die. Whenever a confrontation between two units is starting to look bad, people try to save their lives, and this is why discipline was such an important aspect, with the Romans being a perfect example of how disciplined soldiers can be. But the undead? They don't care. You need to kill every single one of them. Otherwise, they'll just keep going. They'll just keep coming. And particularly those who are not extremely intelligent, not higher than that of animals like skeletons and zombies, they just go forward, they don't care. As a final point I'd like to raise for this video is the real threat posed by ghosts. Ghosts, phantoms, disembodied entities are probably the scariest in my opinion, because we have two situations. Either, for whatever reasons, people find materials or rituals or some sort of magic that can keep them out. Normal walls won't keep these foes at bay, so people won't be able to sleep anymore. And if you have graveyards nearby, probably they would have to become illegal. In fact, again, another social aspect, if the undead were a real thing, possibly the entirety of Christendom would start burning bodies. No cemeteries anymore, no crypts, nothing. Too dangerous. Now, for the sake of our thought experiment, we'll consider that people find ways to keep ghosts as well outside of cities, but still, an enemy that you cannot hit, this is probably the scariest, and normally fantasy approaches this with the idea of magic or magical weapons that are the only ones that can hit an ethereal being. I think if you wanted to create a setting which is more realistic, where humans don't have access to magic, then probably you would have to imagine that there are some sort of laws that for some reasons don't allow these ghosts to just come in contact with us all the time, a sort of veil that can be broken at times or restored. What's interesting is that probably this would influence religion and rituals and all the different prayers that would involve ways to keep ghosts away. Alright noble ones, well thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this speculative video, and I'd like to make more. I could turn this into a series that could be interesting for those of you who like historical things, because I do bring up some points that have to do with history, of course, but on the other side, this could be interesting for dungeon masters, for people who play, for people who write novels, and they use fantasy, but they also like to make it more realistic, believable, and probable. If you do like this idea, I could go on talking about how inside of crypts and undergrounds and basements of churches would actually look like in reality. We could do the same with dungeons inside of castles and how to furbish them in a more real way. We could continue the same line. What would our world be if elves and other pointy-eared creatures were a thing, or if magic was a reality? Well, let me know if you like this sort of videos. I could turn it into a series and share this video if that's what you want to see. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.